The lighthouse rises out of the rocks at the very edge of the sea. From a distance it looks like a pillar, a tall and silent figure that has stood watch for centuries. The waves break endlessly at its base, white spray leaping against black stone, falling back into the foam, only to rise again. The gulls circle overhead, crying into the wind, their wings catching the last light of the sun as it dips toward the horizon. The air smells of brine, sharp and cold, filled with the taste of salt. That never leaves this place. The horizon is wide and endless, a scene where sea and sky meet. A line so distant it feels eternal. At the base of the tower, a door stands weathered and heavy. The keeper pushes it open, the hinges creaking as though they too are weary from years of storms. He steps inside, carrying his oil can, his cloth, his logbook. The stone walls swallow him in their cool silence, the air damp and still, scented faintly of smoke and iron. He pauses a moment, breathing in the calm of the tower before beginning his climb. His staircase winds upward in a spiral, tight around the hollow heart of the tower. His boots strike the steps with a steady rhythm, slow and sure, echoing upward and downward at once. He keeps one hand on the iron railing, cold and slick with condensation. He has climbed these stairs thousands of times, yet never counts them. He does not need to. His body knows the way. Each step carries the weight of memory. Each landing feels like the pause of a heartbeat before the climb begins again. Tonight the steps are quiet, listening. Sometimes they groaned, sometimes they sighed. Tonight they are still, as though the tower itself is holding its breath. The lantern chamber waits at the top. The great Fresnel lens rests within it, its many panes of glass already catching the last scraps of daylight and scattering them in fractured beams across the walls. The brass fittings are dark and still, the gears silent, the oil reservoir waiting. The keeper sets down his tools and begins his ritual. He wipes the glass with a clean cloth, slow and careful, until it gleams clear and perfect. He puts the brass until it shines faintly in the dimming light. He winds the gears until they click and tick, patient as the beat of a clock. He pours oil into the reservoir, steady and unhurried, making sure every drop finds its place. These motions are not hurried, nor are they new. They are as familiar to him as breathing, as natural as the turning of the tide. When the work is done, he strikes the flame. At first it flickers, trembling like a child's breath. Then it steadies, catches blooms into brightness. The great lens bends it, magnifies it, and sends it outward, a long beam that cuts across the sea. Slowly, the lantern begins to turn. The light sweeps the horizon, back and forth, a watchful arm stretching into the distance. Ships far away, ships he will never see, ships whose crews will never know his name, are guided by this light. He knows this. It is enough. The keeper sits at the small desk near the window and opens the logbook. Its pages are thick and heavy, filled with the ink of years, some written by his hand, some by the hands of keepers before him, each line a record. Of nights like this one, he dips his quill into the ink and writes carefully the date, the hour, the weather, the state of the sea. He notes the schooner that passed in the evening, its sails bright against the setting sun. He writes of the gulls that lingered on the rocks, the smell of rain on the wind, the way the air grew colder after dusk. His letters are slow and steady, his lines deliberate, as though the sea itself might one day read them. When the entry is finished, he closes the book and sets the quill aside. He listens. The lantern ticks as it turns. The gears hum softly. The flame hisses inside the glass. Outside, the sea roars against the rocks, its rhythm endless, tireless. The wind presses against the tower, sliding across its stone walls, whistling faintly through the cracks. These are the sounds he knows best, the sounds of his world. He lights the small stove in the corner. The kettle sits atop it, humming as it warms. He spoons leaves into his cup, waits as the water hisses and steams, pours it over, and breathes in the scent of earth and smoke. The warmth of the cup seeps into his hands, into his bones. He drinks slowly, watching the light sweep the chamber. As the lantern revolves, each pass of the beam paints the walls with brightness, then lets them fade again into shadow, then paints them again. It is a rhythm as steady as the sea. Midnight comes quietly, without fanfare. The stars are out now, thousands of them, scattered across the sky like salt on dark cloth. The horizon has vanished into blackness. The sea is only a sound now, a deep rumbling that never ceases. Fog creeps in from the water, silver and ghostly, wrapping itself around the rocks, pressing against the glass. The beam cuts through it, scattering the droplets into brief sparks of light before they vanish. The world outside seems to breathe, shimmering and fading, like a dream. The keeper climbs the stair again, lantern in hand. He steps into the gallery, the night air cold against his skin, damp with mist. He wipes the glass of the lens with a steady hand, clearing the fog's breath. He leans on the railing and looks out into the white blur. Nothing but fog, nothing but night, and yet he knows the ships may be out there. He knows they trust the light, even if they cannot see it. That trust is enough. He returns to the chamber, writes a note in the log about the fog, the temperature, the stillness of the sea beneath its shroud. The hours drift past. 1 o'clock, then 2. The lamp turns. The gears grind. The surf hammers. The keeper eats a small meal. Bread, cheese, an apple sliced into quarters, a strip of dried pork. He chews slowly, unhurried, each bite a comfort, a tether to the land. Beyond this lonely rock. He drinks the last of his tea, cold now, but steadying. Sometimes he hears gulls even at night, their cries thin and lost in the fog. Sometimes they land on the gallery rail, their claws scratching faintly at the metal. He imagines them as fellow keepers, watching with him, sharing the night. Storms come often, and tonight one begins to rise. The wind picks up, rattling the shutters. Rain begins to lash against the glass, running in rivers down the panes. The tower groans under the pressure, but it holds. The lantern beam sweeps on, unwavering. The keeper braces the door below, checks the shutters, climbs to add oil to the flame. Lightning bursts across the horizon, white and blinding, followed by the rolling crash of thunder. The tower shakes, but the light does not falter. He writes in the log, his hand wavering with the motion of the stone beneath him. But he writes, anyway. The words lean like sailors in a storm, but they stand. Hours pass this way, the storm raging outside, the tower holding firm, the flame burning bright. By the time 3 o'clock arrives, the thunder has begun to fade. The rain lessens, the wind softens. The sea, though restless, begins to calm. The keeper makes tea again, pours it, drinks it slowly, letting the warmth fill the hollow left by the storm. He closes his eyes for a moment, listening to the new quiet, the slow return of the sea's regular rhythm. He opens his eyes. He writes, one more line in the log. Storm past. Light steady. The lantern turns. The beam sweeps. The sea breathes. The night endures. The hours after the storm feel like a second sea layered over the first. A hush that spreads out and settles in the hollows of the rocks. A stillness that lets smaller sounds step forward and be heard. The keeper listens to them all, the way a man might listen to the breathing of a house he loves. There is the soft tick of the lantern's clockwork, patient and precise. There is the faint sigh of the stove cooling after tea, the metal contracting in whispers. There is the occasional slip of a drop along the outer glass, drawing a meandering line before it falls away into the dark. Beneath and behind everything, there is the old heartbeat of the Atlantic, tireless, faithful, rolling in and rolling back forever. He stands and stretches, moving slowly to keep the rhythm unbroken, then traces a fingertip along the brass edging of the service door, feeling the tiny scratches that years have written there. He can pick out the scuffs he himself has left, one from a hurried night when a cutter lamp faltered, one from carrying a box of new wicks up the spiral in a gale, but mostly the scratches belong to keepers before him, men whose names he knows, from the first pages of the log and from a few old letters folded in the bottom drawer. He keeps those letters wrapped in sailcloth to protect them from damp. Sometimes, between tending and polishing, he unfolds one and reads, not for news, but for cadence. Their words move the way the sea moves, steady, careful, sparing in praise, exact about whether it lessers remind him that the tower outlasts every keeper, but keeps a little of each. It pleases him to think that the lens holds not only light but memory. He climbs again, not because anything is wrong, but because the habit of watchfulness is a comfort. The steps accept his weight, each tread warming a little where his boot lands. In the lantern room he checks the draft shutters and the ventilator, feels for any breath of smoke that might hint at sooting, studies the flame through the mica panel. The wick burns true, a pale, even corner, no ghosting on the glass, no jagged edge to the light. He opens the service door and steps onto the narrow gallery. The fog has thinned. It clings in low, pale skeins to the troughs of the sea, and between these bands the water shows the color of tarnished pewter. Far off, a star winks through. He lifts his face to the night and lets the damp touch him. There is a smell just after. Rain has given up stone, rinsed clean, kelp laid open, a sweetness briefly freed from the brine. He breathes it in and out until the smell becomes simply night again. Back inside, he sets the lantern's log key beside the journal and takes a soft brush to the brass little strokes, quick and kind, lifting salt dust from corners only he will notice. The brush taps now and then along the rim, a miniature metronome for the slow hour. Once he has polished what cannot be seen, he sits and writes a few lines that no rule requires. A note on how the fog tore like cloth above the third shoal. A note on the way the gulls did not complain through the worst of the thunder. A note on how the beam looked soft as wool when the rain stood at its thickest. He does not expect anyone to read these lines, but he writes them for the tower, for whatever part of it listens. 2 o'clock arrives the way a tide line arrives, quietly but with proof. He knows it by the way the wind slackens round the eastern face and by the way the flame's faint hiss grows audible under the lens. He pours a little more oil, not because the measure demands it, but because the gesture satisfies some old promise between the light and the dark. He checks the spare mantles, the extra wicks, the hand lantern hung by the inner door. His hands move across these objects like a farmer's hands over tools laid in a row, counting, remembering, letting each weight and texture reassure him that no surprise in the next hour will find him unready. When he has finished the rounds no one will ever see. He leans on the sill and watches the beam complete another circuit. He hears again the echo of storms he has known, the March blow that swept the long sandbar bare so you could see the bones of wrecks sunk in other centuries. The January ice that rimmed every rail and step so thick that the lens turned inside. A crystal cage. The late summer squall that turned the world a strange green and toppled a skiff against the lower rocks like a toy. That last storm left a story in the log that he cannot help rereading. A fisherman from the harbour 3 miles up coast had started home too late, his engine coughing, the swell tricking him toward the wrong gap in the reef. The keeper saw his stern lantern lift and drop in the wrong place and understood at once what the water would do in the next 5 minutes. He rang the bell one of the few nights he has used. Itan set the secondary lamp to a quicker arc. He remembers the tightness in his chest as the boat's shadow moved against the beam. This sudden pivot when the fisherman finally guessed, or lucked, or listened to some older voice than chart or buoy. He remembers how the man's hull cleared, the last teeth of stone by a distance you could measure with a hand. No one came the next day to thank him. No one had to. He had written, set auxiliary, observed near error, returned to channel. He had added, not as keeper, but as man. God, keep them from thinking they did this alone. Then he had crossed out the last sentence, not because he did not mean it, but because some sentences are written only for a room and a night. The tide turns. He feels it through the stair, through the stone, through the old scars of the headland. The sea runs the other way now, drawing against the spine of the coast, smoothing where it earlier clawed, the whole body of water shifting its mind. He takes off his jacket and hangs it by the stove, then wraps both hands around the cooling teacup and drinks what remains. The tea is cool and a little bitter. It tastes like staying up. He likes the way the porcelain lip touches his mouth, a small, clean contact, a reminder that there are still small, exact things in the world that are neither wind nor water. Sometimes, in these middle hours, he lets his thoughts walk down the years to the boy he was, on the river above the harbour, scrubbing nets on a dock that smelled of diesel and herring. He can see the knife his father kept in the wheelhouse, the way the oil-darkened handle took the print of a palm, the way the blade fit exactly into a gap in the wood where it slept when seas were kind. He remembers his father counting weather, not by forecasts, but by the fatness of the gulls, the way the channel buoys leaned, the taste of the first mouthful of air when you stepped from the lee of the fish sheds. His father had said little about fear, and less about pride. He had said that steady hands will beat clever talk if the day is long. He had said that light on the headland looks far away until you need it, and then it looks like your own name, called from a window. The keeper lets the light turn and turn while he thinks. He imagines, as he has every night for years, what the beam looks like from a distance. He imagines the thin white blade lifting across a deck, flattening every shadow for the length of a breath, then leaving darkness carefully in place again. He imagines a boy on a boat, seeing that light, and deciding that the world is larger than he feared, and kinder than he hoped, because somewhere an unseen man keeps it burning. Perhaps that boy will one day stand in a tower like this. Perhaps he will stand at a bench in a town nowhere near the sea and fit a watch's spring into its wheel and keep time for strangers. Perhaps he will grow old far inland and look up at a street light in winter and feel the same relief, because something stays on in the dark. 3 o'clock comes and brings with it a drowsy hour. The body's tide goes out. The muscles consider their complaint. The eyes wish to close against the gentle wheeling light. The keeper stands to keep that wish from becoming action. He takes the brush again and coaxes a little more brightness from a brass hinge, then clears the glass of the smallest smudge that only the night would know. He walks once around the room, fingertips trailing along the inner curb of the lantern's base, feeling for grit, for a stray grain of salt, for anything that ought not be there. He finds nothing. He finds, instead, the comfort in finding nothing. Down the stair, he checks the fuel drums and the spare glass panes, the crates of wicks wrapped in waxed paper, the canvas bundle of tools with each wrench nested in its fellow. He lifts the lid on the box of polishing powder and sees that he has enough. He closes it and hears the sift of the fine grains within. The sound reminds him of that particular hush when snow begins on the coast, so rare a thing that its memory shines the brighter for the scarcity. He remembers one such snowfall when he climbed to the gallery to see the sea made briefly into a field of soft iron and the dunes inland smoothed into animals that had fallen asleep. The light turned through that snow as if through down, and the beam looked warmer in its winter coat. Back in the lantern room, he opens the little cupboard where he keeps a chunk of bread, a folded piece of cheesecloth, a tin of dried figs. He eats 1 fig, 2, no more, and listens for the change in the air that means the last edge of night has begun to soften. The change is small, but certain. He lives in the corners first, and then spills up the walls. He has seen it from the tower so often that he can tell it by the way the flame looks against the glass, still bright, still essential, but suddenly no longer the only ruler of the room. He writes in the log, clouds broken, wind veering, points he's easing on the second bar. He closes the book and stands without hurry. There are nights when dawn takes its time, when a long band of cloud hangs stubborn over the eastern swell and holds back the exact joy of first light. That is not this night. This night, the cloud breaks early, and the horizon presents itself like the thin rim of a cup. The dark drinks what it can, and the rest spills over into day. He climbs to the gallery, with the last of the stars above, and the first of the pale air below, and he watches the line brighten from a seam to a thread to a wire to a blade. The sea's color changes by degrees so minute that no single instant claims them. The rocks wake where spray has lacquered them into black lacquer and where the long runnels shine like new tin. He can make out the inside shoal now. The boiled water is standing there as if thinking, the slick trough beyond it smooth as glass dropped from a bottle. He stands with his hands lightly on the rail. His palms take the cold into them. A gull glides past, nearly still, and then, as if remembering its appointment, it strokes twice and slides on toward the sand patch. He thinks of the little marks in the log where earlier keepers wrote such mornings, in a handful of words, fair haze to east, compliments of the day. He liked that phrase, compliments of the day, as if the day were a guest who had knocked modestly, and then stepped in to sit at the table without asking for more than a cup. He returns to the lamp and lets the flame down gently. He does not snap it out. He does not starve it. He coaxes it smaller and smaller until the light stays warm on the wick without smoke. Then he gives it the last small breath that means the night's duty is over. The smoke that rises is thin and blue and tender as thread. He goes up and disappears. The lens, relieved of brightness, becomes simply glass again, all transparency and curve, all patient crystal waiting for evening. He takes the cloth and warms it in his hands, and then touches it to the panes, catching the faintest film from the night's labor, leaving each surface as clean as a thought you can trust. The clockwork slows and ceases. The hush that follows is not silence, not really, because the sea takes that moment to lay down another long note on the rocks, but the hush is real, just the same. He hears the difference, honors it, and moves on. He wipes a small arc on the brass. He needs a bit of oil into the leather gasket. He checks the hinge pins. He opens the ventilator a quarter turn more and props the service door to let the new air walk through the room. The lighthouse seems to exhale. Down the stair, he sets the kettle on, lays a pan on the stove, cracks 2 eggs into a small enamel bowl. He stirs them with a fork until the yellow is soft and even, then pours them into the pan where they thicken just enough to hold shape. He folds them once, twice, and slips them onto a plate next to a slice of bread, browned in the same pan. He eats standing, not from hurry, but because the standing lets him watch the doorway and the window and the stove, all without turning his head. The first true light reaches the lower room and discovers the scuff marks on the floor and the hairline, crack in the glaze of his cup and the nick on the edge of the table where a crate once bit too hard. He finds these small defects kind. They mean the place has been used well. Breakfast finished. He carries his plate and cup to the basin and washes them in water he warmed with what remained in the kettle. He dries them with a cloth he keeps only for this, then sets them in their place beside the flour tin and the jar of tea. He sweeps the floor in a slow spiral, brushing grit toward the center until it makes a neat, small pile that proves last night's weather was real. He opens the outer door and tips the grit into the yard, where the wind can do what it always does, redistribute. Nickel-gray clouds hang over the inland hills, but out here the sky is clean. He hears the fire bell in the harbor mark the top of the hour. The sound arrives like something offered rather than demanded. There is a workless tact beside the inner door, not because you would forget without it, but because writing a task makes it gentler to keep. He touches each line with his finger as if greeting a row of neighbors, polish the secondary reflector, mend the frayed edge of the gallery rope, oil the lower hinge that likes to speak too much on wet days, level the flagstaff bracket, check the marks on the outer wall that tell the truth about storm spray. He takes the small tin of black paint from the cupboard and sets it by the door for later. He will touch the letters on the seaward side before noon, before the sun climbs too high and the paint skins over too fast. It pleases him to see the name fresh against the stone, legible from a mile out, not because anyone sails by letters alone, but because names deserve tending same as flame. As the day lifts, small events accumulate the way dune grass accumulates sand slowly, exactly, until a shape stands where there was none. A pair of turns disputes some matter invisible to him, and then forgets their grievance. A faint line appears on the horizon and resolves, with patience and light, into a coaster carrying timber north. A seal's head shows in the lee of the outer rock, black marble wet to the whiskers, old eyes unblinking, then slides away as if the water had thought better of revealing it. He adds none of these things to the log. The log is for weather and light, for measures and facts. These other details he files into the room itself, into the chair leg smoothness where his hand has held it the same way too many mornings to count, into the way the stove door shuts when you angle it just right, into the manner in which the top latch of the tool chest prefers a firm word to a persuasive one. By 9 the last rags of fog have cleared the headland, leaving nothing between tower and sky but blue so thin it feels like glass blown wide. He carries the tin and brush out to the seaward wall and sets the small ladder just so, its feet wedged in 2 old hollows worn by older boots. The letters face the horizon. It begins with the first stroke on the first curve, laying new black over older black, steadying his breath so the line will not thicken by mistake. Paint gathers and falls in one small tear. He catches it with the brush tip, turning error into thickness, thickness into rightness. A cormorant lifts and settles on the far perch, spreads its wings to dry, a small saint in slick feathers blessing the day he paints until each letter looks as it ought, not too crisp to be proud, not too shabby to be ashamed. When he climbs down and steps back, the name holds the wall like something it earned, not borrowed. The sun warms the stone. The sea takes on its noon voice, busy, practical, clap and hush, clap and hush. He drinks water from the corked bottle by the door and lets the shadow of the tower fall long and cool across his boots. A skiff ghosts close in the fair channel. 2 figures inside, one rowing, one holding the line of a trap, whose marker he had watched ride the storm. They work in an old rhythm: pull, coil, check, decide, return. He raises a hand in a small salute, not meant to be seen at that distance, but meant all the same. He is glad for their work, which looks like his work translated into rope and salt and muscle. They pass and become a moving punctuation mark far down the fringe of water where the shoal points its private finger at boats that do not listen. He returns inside, where the tower's shade keeps the rooms a little cool even in fair weather. The smell of brass polish has settled into its second-day sweetness, less sharp, more like a memory of lemons held in metal. He sits and opens the drawer that holds the old letters. He chooses one at random by not choosing, letting his fingers find the fold that wants unfolding, and he reads a paragraph or two. The hand is more slanted than his, the ink paler. The writer notes a night when the light showed through sleet, when the anchor ice in the marsh glittered like small cities, when the bell and the inner buoy froze to silence, and then, some time before morning, sang again as if it had been away and returned. He folds the letter closed and puts it back exactly where it was. He does not need stories to fill the day. The day is all story. But he likes knowing that across the years another man had stood here and loved the sound of a buoy finding its voice after coal. He moves through the workless without hurry. He lifts the gallery rope into a coil and finds the fray. He pulls new line through the old splice, his thumbs teaching the new fibers how to lie down among their elders. He oils the hinge that used to complain and listens to its contentment. He levels the flagstaff bracket with a carpenter's patience. He checks the storm marks at the outer wall, tracing the highest ring with the tip of a finger, the way you trace a height chart. You measuring growth of force instead of the growth of a child. When a gust comes and drops the temperature by a breath, he feels it as if a thought had passed through him. He answers with a thought of his own later. At dusk, more oil, a second look at the ventilator. By afternoon, the color of the sea shifts again, darker in lanes where wind touches it, lighter where calm holds. The light on the water looks like small coins tossed by a careful hand. The harbor upcoast softens to a suggestion. The day, large and open in the morning, begins to fold itself into smaller rooms. He sets a pot of bean soup on the stove and lets it think. The smell of salt pork and onion makes the tower feel less like a watch and more like a house. He eats from a bowl with a spoon polished by years of hot broth, then washes the bowl and sets it upside down on the clean cloth to dry. The long shadows return. The gulls begin to argue again, as if evening requires opinions. The keeper goes to the lowered door and looks once more at the sky, checking the long thin clouds that sometimes mean a change and sometimes mean nothing. He tastes the air and decides it means a calm night with a little fog after midnight. He nods to the air as if closing a deal. Then he turns to the stairs and begins the slow, inward climb to the lantern room, the spiral carrying him up as if the tower itself were lifting him like a slow tide. He arrives before the sun has quite left the glass. He polishes without haste. He winds the clockwork and feels it come alive in his hand. He checks the wick, trims the faint burr where cotton can go wild, smooths it with a knife until its edge is straight as a horizon. He sets the lamp. He waits the extra beat he has taught himself to wait, so he can be sure waiting is not the same as hurry. Then he gives the flame back to the night, and the night receives it. And the length takes that gift and carries it farther than a man can walk, and longer than a voice can call. The beam swings, slow and sure, painting the first lines of evening on the water. He writes the day's last daylight note in the log and closes the book with a soft push, a motion that has become his signature more than his pen ever could be. The room is warm now. The light is work now. The night steps through the door of the sea and comes in, polite as always, unignorably vast. The keeper is ready. He has done what the day asked. He will do what the night requires. The world will go on being large and ordinary and miraculous. And from a mile out, a boy will look landward and feel safer than he can say, and the boy will not know why. The hours of evening gather themselves like a shawl, and the tower wears them. The keeper moves through his rounds as if through a simple song he learned so long ago. He no longer needs the words. He touches brass. He listens to glass. He writes a number and looks out at water that writes numbers of its own in white along the reefs. The light keeps time. The sea keeps time. His breathing keeps time. The day goes behind him like a tide slipping off a flat. Ahead waits the deep of night again, with its quiet, its patience, its chance for fog. He feels no dread and no pride. He feels the good paleness of calm work and the darker, older calm that work protects. And so the middle of the night approaches, not as a wall but as a wide meadow you enter without noticing, because the path into it is simply a little smoother, the air a little cooler, the sounds a touch more hollow and exact. He is there again, where he has been so many times, that this time joins all the others, and becomes not repetition but belonging. He lifts his face, tooth-lensed, and sees himself small and bent in 100 facets, and he smiles at the many men he has been to keep one light. The beam turns and turns, and the sea answers, and the tower stands, and he themselves stand within it, one more keeper inside a long vigil that has no other name but kindness. That is how the night holds him as the clock's next hour comes on, and that is how he holds the night, part for part, breath for breath, each completing the other, ready for whatever dawn will lay down like a new chart just beyond the rim of the world. The hours after midnight are always the quietest, not because the sea has hushed it, never does, but because the world seems to have agreed that silence should be shared then. The lantern turns, steady as breathing, and the flame holds true. The keeper moves gently, as though even the tower itself is resting and should not be disturbed. His boots sound softer against the floor, his hands quieter against the brass. He pauses often just to listen, as if sound itself were rare and worth tending. The clock ticks with patience. The flame whispers inside its glass, and the sea hurls itself again and again against the headland, refusing to rest even when the sky is emptied of stars. He warms his hands around the kettle and pours himself another cup of tea, though he knows he will drink only half before it cools. The act of pouring, of holding, is its own kind of company. The cup feels heavy, steady, reliable. He sets it down and lets the steam curl against his cheek, then vanish into the larger breath of the tower. Sometimes, in these hours, he thinks of time differently, not as something that moves forward, but as something that circles like the lantern, like the tides, like the turning of seasons. He imagines every keeper before him awake at this same hour, in this same room, listening to the same sea. He imagines that they, too, paused with a half-cup of tea, scribbled notes in the margins of their logs, rubbed a thumb against the cold brass, and wondered if anyone would remember the sound of the flame's soft hiss. He feels joined to them, not separated. They are here, as much a part of the stone as he is. 3 o'clock passes, 4 approaches. The body grows heavy, yet he does not lie down. His rest is different. He rests in motion, in the turning of the light, in the repetition of tasks. So familiar they are, like sleep with open eyes. He wipes the lens again, though it is already clean. He checks the oil again, though it is already full. He traces the edge of the logbook, feeling the grain of the paper, the grooves of ink pressed in years ago. Each act is small, but together they are an anchor. They keep him steady when the world is nothing but dark water and wind. Out at sea, something groans, perhaps the hull of a ship shifting under strain, perhaps the voice of a whale too deep to see. The sound rolls across the waves and fades before he can be sure. He writes nothing of it in the log. It is not weather, not measurable, but he stores it in his mind. He stores everything, every cry of the gulls, every trick of the light, every tremor of stone. It is his unseen record, as valuable as ink and more lasting than paper. By 4, the horizon begins to pale, slowly, softly, as though the world itself is cautious of waking. The stars dim, one by one. The lantern beam is still bright, but it is no longer the only ruler of the sea. A faint silver sheen spreads across the water, and the keeper feels it before he sees it, the way a man feels the warmth of a fire before the flame itself comes into view. He climbs the stair one last time. He checks the flame, still steady. He stands at the gallery, leaning against the rail, and breathes in the air of a world changing. The first gull cries. It echoes across the water like the striking of a bell. The keeper answers it in his own way, not with voice but with silence. He watches as the horizon becomes a line of pale gold. The sea brightens with it, each wave crest catching the light and sending it back in shards. The fog, which clung so thick in the night, unravels into ribbons, then into nothing at all. The rocks gleam, wet and shining, and the spray that leaps from them sparkles briefly before falling back into the tide. He extinguishes the flame, not suddenly, but gently, coaxing it down until it is no more than a glowing thread on the wick, then giving it the final breath that ends its night's work. A curl of blue smoke rises and vanishes. The lantern sighs, relieved. The gears slow, then stop. The room is full of daylight now, soft and forgiving. The lens is no longer a blazing eye, but a great glass sculpture, transparent and quiet, reflecting nothing but the coming sun. The keeper wipes the glass one last time, smooths the brass with his cloth, and leaves the chamber. His boots echo down the spiral, slow, deliberate. Each step feels like an ending and a beginning at once. At the base, he notes the sunrise in his log. He writes of the fog's departure, of the calm sea, of the gulls waking in the rocks. He closes the book with care, as though closing the night itself. Day begins, and with it a different rhythm. The chores wait, oil to replenish, brass to polish, shutters to check, steps to sweep. He will do them one by one, without hurry. He cooks his breakfast on the stove, eggs folded gently in the pan, bread browned beside them, a piece of fruit sliced to sweeten the plate. He eats standing at the small window, watching the light climb higher, watching the sea grow bluer, watching the world wake around him. Later, he will paint letters on the seaward wall, black on stone, steady strokes that last a year before the salt eats at them again. Later, he will mend the rope on the gallery rail, splice it neat and strong, hands teaching the new fiber how to live with the old. Later, he will sweep the floor, gather the grit left by the storm, and carry it outside, where the wind will scatter it back to the shore. He will check the spare glass panes, the drums of oil, the crates of wicks, the little things that together make the great thing possible. These tasks fill the day, yet the day never feels full. It feels balanced, as if nothing is wasted and nothing is too much. Sometimes visitors come, though not often. A fisherman delivering a crate of supplies. A boy from the harbor curious to see the lamp. They stay a little while, ask questions, listen to his answers, then leave, the sound of their voices fading down the stair. The keeper watches them go, not with sadness, but with understanding. Their lives are out there, moving, changing, rushing. His is in here, steady, patient, repeating. Both are necessary. Both are true. As the sun climbs higher, the sea sparkles brighter. The horizon stretches wide, clear now. No fog, no storm, only blue upon blue. The tower stands as it has always stood, a pillar of stone, a keeper of memory, a guardian of the night. The keeper breathes deeply, the salt air filling him. He knows the night will come again, and with it the same rituals, the same flame, the same watchful hours. He knows he will climb the stair again, polish the glass again, pour the oil again, light the lamp again, and he knows that in doing so, he joins a chain of men and nights stretching back into time, a chain that will continue long after he is gone. The day is bright now, the sea alive, the tower at rest. The keeper sits at his desk, opens the log to an empty page, and waits for the next line of weather, the next ship on the horizon, the next note in the endless music of the sea. The light is gone for now, but its promise lingers, patient, certain. Tonight it will burn again. Tomorrow it will burn again. Always, until it is no longer needed, it will burn, and the keeper will be there. Steady as stone, quiet as tide, faithful as the flame itself.